In the peaceful town of Ash River, nestled quietly among pine-covered mountains, a slender but resolute older woman was about to teach a gang of thugs a lesson they'd never forget after they dared to harass her at the autism center she founded for children. What the gang didn't know was that her ex-husband was none other than Sylvester Stallone, an enduring Hollywood legend. They crossed a line they never should have, and with just one phone call, everything began to change. Years ago, her life had run on red carpets, directors' chairs, and private premieres. She had once been Sasha Stallone, the first wife of a man who eventually belonged more to the screen than to her. Their marriage had burned hot and fast in their 20s, then flickered out with a quiet finality that came not from betrayal, but exhaustion. They drifted, divorced, and dissolved like so many young couples, with too much ambition and too little time. She kept his last name for a while, then didn't. They hadn't spoken to each other in a very long time. She never thought she'd need to. That was until the trucks started coming. After the divorce, Sasha didn't seek the limelight again. She moved north, away from the cities, away from all that noise, and planted her life into the soil of something much quieter, much more sacred. She founded the Blue House, a therapy center for children on the autism spectrum. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was good, real, healing. It started in Portland, with a small team and a single building, an old Victorian home with squeaky floors and creaky doors, filled with sunlight and the sounds of children learning to trust the world. She saw how the arts, animals, and gentle structure could create islands of calm in chaotic minds. The success of that first center gave her the courage to open a second, this time out in the countryside. She wanted the children to feel grass under their bare feet, to hear birds instead of sirens, to ride horses, not elevators. So she came to Ash River, leased a piece of land just outside town, converted an old farmhouse and barn into therapy rooms and sensory gardens, and called it the new Blue House. The grand opening was quiet. Parents cried, volunteers clapped, and for a few weeks everything felt like it had meaning again. Then just when the soft rhythm of things began to settle, the wrong kind of attention arrived. It started subtly. A beer can in the horse pasture, tire tracks through the flower beds. Sasha thought maybe it was local teenagers being dumb. But then the spray paint came. Words no child should have to see, scrawled across the side of the sensory barn. Freak Farm was one of the nicer ones. She cleaned it up herself, heart heavy. When the fence was cut and the therapy garden trampled, she filed her first report with the sheriff. The deputy was kind enough, if a bit too calm. "Hard to say who did it," he said. "Could be random. Let us know if anything else happens." Something else did, and then something else again. The next incident came on a Tuesday. A red Ford pickup with no plates rolled up just before sundown. 4 men climbed out, each wearing jackets dirtied from oil and cigarettes, their boots pounding the gravel as they laughed their way to the fence. One leaned on the wood like it was his own, chewing on a toothpick as he stared at the mural painted by the children. "Who let the little weirdos loose with paint?" he said. Another kicked over a planter box with his boot. Sasha stepped outside, calm as she could manage. "This is private property," she said. "We work with children here. Please leave." The tallest one, wearing a bandana with a worn Confederate flag stitched to the back, looked her up and down with a crooked grin. "We know what you're doing here, lady. Trying to turn this town into one of those liberal safe spaces? Not gonna fly here. You'd be smart to close up shop." Sasha's hands tightened into fists, but she didn't flinch. "We're not closing. This land is leased legally, and we're operating with the county's full approval." He stepped forward just close enough for her to smell the beer on his breath. "Approval's one thing, permission's another. You'll pack it up, or we'll help you move." Then they walked off, laughing, dust rising behind their truck like smoke from a fire. The next day, she called the sheriff again. A different deputy showed up, younger, less sympathetic. He took notes, but gave no promises. "They didn't break in," he said. "Didn't touch the kids or go inside. Not a lot we can do, unless you've got footage." Sasha didn't. The cameras she'd installed were ripped out of the walls a few nights later. Then someone broke the window to the sensory room, the very space where a boy named Micah sat every morning with noise-canceling headphones, tracing light patterns on the walls to calm his thoughts. Micah cried for hours that day. Sasha cried when she got home. By Friday night, she sat alone in the staff office long after everyone else had gone home. Her teacup was empty, the hallway lights off, and a gentle rain had begun to tap against the tin roof like a metronome for her thoughts. She stared at her phone. One number sat in her contacts untouched for over 10 years. Sylvester. She had scrolled past it 1,000 times. She'd kept it. She didn't know why. Maybe habit, maybe hope. Tonight her hands were shaking. She pressed call. It rang twice. Then, "Yeah?" The voice hit her like a memory. Low, grounded, with that slight rasp that always reminded her of gravel and leather. "Sylvester," she said. She felt her voice catch. "It's Sasha." Silence then. "Sasha, you okay?" The concern was real. It always had been, buried under the layers of who they'd been and who they'd become. "I'm fine. I'm not. Listen, I know it's been years. I wouldn't be calling unless I had no one else. Talk to me. I opened a second center, out in Ash River, for autistic kids. It's being targeted. These guys, they're trying to drive us out. I've gone to the sheriff. I've done everything I can. But they keep coming back. I'm scared. Not for me, but for the kids. They're not safe." She heard his breath on the other end. Slow. Heavy. "You called the law. 3 times. They won't help. They won't stop it." He didn't say anything for a long beat. Then, "Text me the address. I'll be there tomorrow." "Sly," she whispered. "You don't need to explain," he said. "You called me. That's enough." She hung up and sat in the stillness, hands trembling, heart full of something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Relief. The next day, the rumble of a black Suburban came up the gravel drive just as the clouds began to break. She stepped outside, sweater drawn tight across her shoulders, arms crossed, not from the cold, but from everything inside her that was still unsure. Then she saw him. He hadn't changed much. A little more gray at the temples, a little slower in the step, but the same solid shoulders, the same unreadable eyes. He stepped out, nodded once. "You always pick the prettiest corners of nowhere," he said. She gave a half smile. "You always show up when it counts." He looked at the broken window, then back at her. "Let's talk inside." She led him through the hallway, filled with drawings and paper butterflies. No words for what it meant. No need, and in that quiet space between past and present, Sasha knew she hadn't just called a man. She'd called someone who still believed in doing what was right, no matter how long it had been. The kitchen inside the blue house still smelled faintly of chamomile and lavender from the day's activities. Sasha poured 2 mugs of tea, her hand steady, though her heart was not. Sylvester took his without a word, sitting at the small wooden table where so many quiet conversations with parents had taken place. He turned the cup slowly in his hands, examining the delicate blue flowers painted on the side, the steam curling into the warm light above them. Sasha didn't speak at first. She watched him, and he watched the room, taking in the carefully arranged toy bins, the framed art made by the children, the worn welcome mat by the back door. Finally, she said, "I didn't know who else to call." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You didn't need to know. You just called." She nodded and began telling him everything, more fully this time, about the vandalism, the broken window, the threats, the sheriff's half-hearted efforts, the way the kids had started flinching at loud sounds again. She explained who Denny was, at least what little she knew. A local troublemaker with a string of juvenile offenses, and a father who used to run a junkyard near the old Wilson Mill. "They hang around the old gas station on Route 22, she added. "That's their usual spot. Drinking, talking big. Most folks in town just avoid them. But they don't stay in the shadows anymore. They want me gone." Sylvester listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable, but sharp. When she finished, he set down his cup and said, "I'm going to pay that gas station a visit. Not to start a fight, just to look." "Sly," she began, but he was already standing, shrugging on his jacket. "You've done all you can. It's time someone made it clear that you're not alone." He left as the sky turned gray with early evening light. Sasha stood on the porch, watching his truck disappear down the long gravel road, her chest tight. She didn't want violence, but more than that, she didn't want to feel powerless anymore. At the old station, Sylvester pulled into a shadowed corner and turned off the engine. The place looked abandoned. One flickering light over the pump canopy, windows smeared with years of grime. But inside, through the cracked blinds, he saw them. 4 men laughing over beers, tossing a 5th one between them like a toy. Denny was unmistakable. Tall, stringy blonde hair, arms covered in cheap tattoos and arrogance. Sylvester didn't go in. He didn't need to. He watched, noted faces, voices, habits. He saw one of them pocket a switchblade. Another showed off a broken phone, clearly one of the staff's stolen devices. His jaw tightened, but he stayed put. Back at the Blue House, Sasha was locking up when she heard tires crunch on gravel. She turned, breath catching, but it was just Sylvester. He stepped out, nodded once. They're not just kids playing tough. They're organized enough to be dangerous, and they're proud of it. "What now?" she asked. He looked around at the quiet fields, the fading sunlight, the silhouettes of wind chimes swaying on the porch. "Now we let them know they're not the only ones with friends." That night, he made a few calls, not many, just 3. Old friends, men he hadn't spoken to in years, but who never forgot the kind of loyalty that gets forged in fire. The next morning, they arrived. First came Frank, a retired sheriff from Idaho with eyes like steel and a soft voice that could scare most men into confession. Then Pete, a former Marine medic turned farmhand who moved like a shadow and smiled like a ghost. Finally, Benny, the youngest of them all, still in his 50s, a former private investigator who looked like he lived on black coffee and regret. They didn't bring weapons. They brought presents. Sylvester introduced them to Sasha, who didn't know what to make of it all but felt something shift. The men walked the property, installed new cameras, replaced the busted locks, added motion lights, and took turns watching the road from the small tool shed turned makeshift lookout. They weren't security guards. They were just men who knew what it meant to stand for something, and more importantly, to stand for someone. That afternoon, word began to spread through town. People noticed the black Suburban parked out front. They noticed the three unfamiliar men talking quietly at the hardware store. By the second day, the lady at the diner down the road brought coffee to the Blue House, leaving it on the porch with a note. For the ones watching out for our kids. Thank you, the next incident didn't take long. That Friday evening, as the sun dipped low behind the barn, a truck rolled in again. Same red Ford, same driver. But this time, when Denny and his buddies stepped out, they didn't find a quiet, vulnerable building. They found Frank standing near the porch with arms crossed, Pete by the garden beds, whittling a piece of wood with a blade that looked as old as he was. Sylvester stepped out from the front door with nothing but a stare. Denny paused, smirking. Well, look what we got here. A reunion of the old folks' home? Sylvester didn't blink. You're not scaring kids anymore. You've had your fun. Now go. One of the other men, maybe 19 at most, took a step forward. You gonna stop us, Grandpa? Benny, who had been leaning against the far fence, let out a long sigh and walked forward, stopping just inches from the kid. He didn't raise his voice. This isn't about stopping you. It's about finishing this before you really screw up your life. Denny looked around, saw the calm, the quiet strength, and for the first time, seemed unsure. We ain't afraid of you, he muttered. You should be, Sylvester said softly, stepping closer. Not because we're dangerous, but because we're done playing nice. The men hesitated, shuffled, then backed toward the truck. Denny spat into the dirt. This ain't over. No, Sylvester said. It's just beginning. They left without another word. Sasha, watching from inside, felt her legs nearly give. When Sylvester came back in, she handed him a glass of water with trembling fingers. I didn't want it to come to this. It didn't, he said. They came to us. We just stood still. That night, no one came back. For the first time in weeks, the Blue House stayed untouched. The wind blew gently through the chimes. The stars came out in full. The children arrived the next day to a place that felt steady again. The staff smiled wider. Sasha's shoulders dropped an inch. And in the still morning light, Sylvester sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the kids run through the field. He didn't say much. He never had to. But his presence filled the space like oak and iron. The town had noticed. And the gang, well, they'd noticed too. They weren't done. Not yet. But now, neither was he. The silence didn't last. For 3 days, the Blue House stood like a chapel in the woods, calm and undisturbed. The children returned in full numbers, their laughter cautiously blooming in the sunlit garden, like the daffodils Sasha had planted weeks before. Tokarma vodka. The staff regained their rhythm. Parents smiled a little easier. And the community's quiet gratitude began to trickle in through casseroles, left on the porch, and envelopes with no names, just simple words. Thank you for standing your ground. But Sylvester knew better. Trouble never left without testing the locks one last time. On the 4th morning, Frank found tire treads by the back fence, fresh, deep, and deliberate. That afternoon, one of the therapy ponies went missing. Pete found her tied to a tree 2 miles up the road, shaken but unharmed. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was a message. That evening, the Blue House's mailbox was smashed in, and a note left behind with red spray paint across a piece of cardboard. "You were warned." Sylvester read it once, said nothing, and walked it straight to the tool shed where the others were working. They sat together as dusk fell, the air thick with the smell of rain and pine. "They're pushing," Pete muttered, trying to get a reaction. "Trying to scare the kids again," Frank added, jaw clenched. "They don't want to burn it down. They want us to give up." Benny, always the observer, leaned back and said, "They'll escalate until someone gets hurt. They think if they make it ugly enough, the law will force the center to shut down just to stop the chaos." Sylvester stood, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to do when prepping for a fight scene. "Then we don't give them the chaos. We give them the truth." He spent the next morning in town, talking quietly with the sheriff, then the mayor, then a former city attorney who now ran a bookshop. He didn't argue. He presented facts, reports, photos, and statements. Then he'd laid down one last piece of paper, a petition, over 70 signatures. Parents, neighbors, veterans, shopkeepers, even the postmaster. People who believed in the Blue House. People who were done letting bullies write the story of their town. The sheriff looked at the paper, then at Sylvester. "You think you can flush them out without starting a war?" "I don't need a war," Sylvester replied. "Just daylight." With the mayor's reluctant blessing, Sylvester organized a community meeting under the guise of a neighborhood safety forum. Flyers were posted, phone trees lit up, and when the night arrived, the town hall was packed. Sasha stood at the back, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of it. Seeing people she hadn't known cared so deeply, sitting shoulder to shoulder, listening. Sylvester stepped to the podium. No microphone, no drama. Just a calm, clear voice. "This is not about politics, not about sides. It's about protecting what's good, what's right. A group of men have been targeting children. Children. Let that sink in. This isn't a zoning dispute or a noise complaint. It's intimidation. It's cruelty. And it stops now." He held up the photos of broken windows, spray paint, slashed tires. "We've let them operate in the shadows. It's time we turned the lights on." When he finished, no one clapped. Not out of disapproval, but because the silence in the room was the kind that came when people knew they'd been asleep and just woke up. The sheriff stood and spoke next, then the mayor, then a young mother whose son had said his first word in the Blue House's music room. By the end of the night, the town had made up its mind. The gang's power had come from isolation. Now the town was united. The final confrontation didn't come with fists. It came with subpoenas, arrest warrants, legal notices. The sheriff, with newfound courage, rolled into the gas station with 2 deputies and a city official. Denny and 2 of his buddies were arrested on charges ranging from trespassing to animal endangerment to destruction of property. The rest scattered. When word got out, something strange happened. Local teens who had once admired Denny began talking, giving statements, saying enough was enough. Ash River wasn't their playground anymore. The aftermath was quieter than Sasha expected. No fireworks, no scenes, just the steady repair of what had been broken. The porch was fixed, the garden replanted, the horses' stall reinforced. Security lights were upgraded, and in the weeks that followed, something deeper settled in. A sense of safety, yes, but also dignity. One crisp morning, Sasha found Sylvester fixing a broken latch on the barn door, a mug of black coffee nearby. She leaned against the frame, arms folded. "I don't know how to thank you." He didn't look up. "You already did. You built this place. You gave these kids a world worth defending. You didn't have to come. You didn't have to call. They stood there for a moment, the breeze brushing through the trees, carrying the sound of children laughing in the distance. She looked at him, the man she once loved, who had grown older, but never smaller. You staying? She asked softly. He smiled, barely. For a while, long enough to make sure it sticks. A week later, a bench appeared under the largest tree in the yard. On it, a small plaque, to those who show up when it counts. The children took to it quickly, reading, drawing, just sitting in the shade. Sasha found herself sitting there too sometimes, thinking about the winding paths that brought people back into your life at just the right moment, no matter how long they'd been gone. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she sat beside Sylvester on that bench, both of them watching Micah chase bubbles blown by a therapist near the garden. You know, she said quietly, if you had shown up like this 25 years ago, I might not have let you go. He chuckled, rubbing his knees. If I'd known how to be this man 25 years ago, I wouldn't have let you walk. She reached out and gently rested her hand on his. No promises, no explanations. Just two people who had lived long enough to understand that sometimes love came back in a different form, steadier, wiser, and still strong enough to stand when the wind rose again. And in the little corner of Oregon, where peace had once been fragile, it now stood firm, held up by the quiet strength of a woman who never stopped fighting for children who couldn't fight for themselves, and a man who answered the call without needing to ask why.